It is Friday, December 29th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to the final 2023 LTPS. As always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. This is your last call to claim the December PS Plus essential games before they go away. This coming Tuesday on the 2nd in 2024, it's going to change over to Plague Tale Requiem on PS5, Evil West on PS4, PS5, and Nobody Saves the World on PS4, PS5 as well. I'll tell you, not a bad way to start off the new year. A Plague Tale Requiem, that's something where a lot of folks really enjoyed that first game. I did as well, so that is a great one to kick it off with. But also Evil West, where I feel like not many people got to try that game out when it came out in 2022. So one of those more, I guess, low-key titles, if we can call it that. But rounding out the lineup with Nobody Saves the World, so some good variety there. There's really not many other bad ways to start the new year with PS Plus, so definitely something to try out, at least with one of these titles. Now, moving on to our first news story, Sony finally gave us an update on a game they're publishing that was supposed to come out this year, and that is Stellar Blade, where they did not make any sort of, formal acknowledgement of this game getting delayed, but it seemed very obvious it was not going to come out on time, and so recently on the PlayStation blog for a write-up about games coming out next year, Stellar Blade is on there. They don't say anything in particular or anything noteworthy about it, just some very brief marketing text, and the game has a 2024 release window. Just 2024, by the way, so sometimes this is where they, and they don't make a big deal about this, but sometimes they will put a proper, quarter release window on there, but we did not even get that. So we know the game is coming out next year, and let's hope they actually do, shift up the studio. Let's hope it does ship sometime next year, considering I know a lot of people are also really looking forward to this game as well. Now, we were not able to cover this on last week's LTPS. It was shortly after the show went up, but we can also mention that Insomniac Games did finally make an acknowledgement of the breach, which is, of course, still unfortunate, and it seemed like their initial play was to not say anything about it. Same for SIE. I'm sure between the studio and SIE, they're scrambling and looking at options and understanding the severity of the leak, and there's a lot more that's at play outside of just having to make formal statements and bringing more attention to this. But having said that, they did publish a statement finally where towards the bottom they say, and I quote here, "We want everyone to enjoy the games we develop as intended and as our players deserve. However, like Logan, Insomniac is resilient. Marvel's Wolverine continues as planned. The game is in early production and will no doubt greatly evolve throughout development, as do all of our plans. While we appreciate everyone's enthusiasm, we will share official information about Marvel's Wolverine when the time is right. On behalf of everyone at Insomniac, thank you for your ongoing support during this challenging time." I have seen some make the suggestion that because we got so much about this game from this breach, with not even so much the vertical slice or the super early alpha gameplay or the build that's out there, it's not even so much that stuff, but in terms of the plot details and cast, and we've said before we're not going to talk about the contents of that. Whether we know those things from the breach or not, it's still subject to change naturally, right? I think some were suggesting that maybe Insomniac is going to have to pivot certain elements of the story to now throw people off guard because of this breach, but they were very likely, whether this breach was or was not going to happen, I should say, it was going to have a rough outline of what was going to happen, but there's still probably some very big key elements that are going to eventually either get cut or things get added in, and same with the gameplay, sort of features and mechanics that were, demonstrated. There's so much to game development. The game is further along than we thought it was, right? Or rather, the game is further out than we thought it was. We can certainly say that. The timeline on this game is not 2024 or 25 for that matter. So, and that was all internal anyway. So it's not something where the game is now further out because of this breach. They are very likely going to still continue the game as they were planning on shaping and molding this thing to be a final product at some point. So regardless of this breach happening, I think we can say that they are going to carve this path out in the way they were still planning on doing it without having the breach get in the way. But at least we have Insomniac's word on it, which it is still so unfortunate that the most important thing about why this was a really bad situation is all the personal information that got out. So I'm sure, they're still really investigating that portion of it. Now, we did mention before, though, that when it comes to the PlayStation business, if there are other noteworthy items that do come out eventually, then we're going to touch on that, which we now got a lot more in regards to PlayStation Plus. It's really more of an insight kind of thing, but at the very minimum, we can get an idea of where Sony may possibly take the direction of the service, as we discussed from last week about how eventually they do have a 3.0 plan for PlayStation Plus, which would be unsurprisingly expanding the service outside of console. That's the way they can get over that saturation point, because if they are mostly saturating on console, they're going to accomplish getting new subscribers outside of that. But this is from the same slide, right? So this is actually like a 60-slide presentation about PlayStation Plus, so we can go over some interesting key metrics, which a lot of it is pretty standard stuff that you'd expect from a large corporation. They're tracking user engagement, the performance of games on the service, exploring ways to maximize return on investment, looking at the long-term goal of going beyond console, etc., etc. And again, we're not going to actually display the slides, but again, in terms of what was displayed, here are the noteworthy items. So the slides are from early 2023. So, when this presentation took place, it's covering up to early 2023, so around March. Now, there's no mention of PS2 classics, since I know some are curious about this. They do list off PS1 and PSP for premium, and that doesn't mean PS2 isn't coming, but just to put out there, there's no mention of here's what we're planning on doing. There's really nothing like that on there. In terms of the entire approach of the service, but there is a slide mentioning that they want to avoid what they call May 2023 risk, which we don't know what that is. It could be the first year after relaunch where subscribers may not possibly renew, but more likely that would be in relation to when the ABK deal was expected to close, which that's pointed out in a slide going over the current challenges of the service, which under a category labeled, and I quote here, limited headline partners, they say Ubisoft is secured, Activision is out, and EA Play is not viable, so the proposed solutions are leaning on larger opportunity partners, identifying day-and-date potential hits, and secure Take-Two and EA titles, which we do see that is eventually what Sony did throughout most of 2023. They also say a challenge is budget due to high costs for headline titles, and the proposed solutions here are leveraging revenue share, crafting more focused monthly lineups, and avoiding bad deals, which for that says verbatim, avoid bad deals, parentheses, no, seriously. As for engagement data, a key takeaway is that per-player engagement drops with a static content library, but new content does drive engagement. The holidays see a large bump, as they tend to do, but a very large hero title like Horizon Forbidden West in February 23 pushes the catalog to a wide engagement level that's back to the holiday levels. So Horizon was a very big bump there, which it does seem like Forbidden West was absolutely a testbed for putting such a big title into the catalog after only 1 year. We also have a different internal slide, which is tracking the retail sales of that game compared to Zero Dawn and identifying the retail slowdown once Forbidden West was added to PS Plus. Of course, they're probably benchmarking the game to see what kind of engagement it can drive and if it's worth doing this versus, keeping the game at retail for longer, because we do know that Zero Dawn had sold 24 million copies, and Forbidden West at this point, while it has done well at 8.4 million, it's now unlikely to ever reach Zero Dawn. But later in the slides, though, we do see that they're doing this for pretty much every first-party game on the service to better understand the cannibalization of sales when when these games are available on PS Plus as well. Looking at the catalog holistically, first-party content is at least a quarter of the total gameplay hours, with it getting as high as 35 to 40% at times, with games like Miles Morales, Ghost of Tsushima, Spider-Man, they all steadily rank in the top 10 on the catalog. But looking at the premium section, so the tier 3 of the service, some metrics for the classic games we do have, Sony points out that the classics perform well with the halo effect, that being relevant new releases. So God of War 3 Remastered is the most played classic game thanks to Ragnarok's release. Number 2 is The Last of Us Remastered thanks to the HBO show, and the God of War collection is number 3. And that's the only PS3 streaming title in the top 10. Elsewhere on the list, though, number 4, 5, and 9 are emulation titles from third parties. It doesn't say what games, but we know 3 third-party classic emulation titles are in the top 10, and we can see that they all have over 400,000 players each. The hours per player on each of them is fairly low, though. 2 of them are 1 hour on average per player, and the other is 0.6 hours. So more than likely that's a short game from PS1 or PSP that people are just popping into to experience again. So that's probably what's going on there. But game trials on PS Plus Premium. Big surprise here, but they do find that those who played and complete the trials all the way through, those see a higher conversion rate for actually buying those games. And the key takeaway is that regardless of how long the trial is, if a person does finish the trial, they are, the conversion rate is more likely that they end up buying the game, right? So the point we're getting at with a lot of these metrics, or at least them being important to note here, is that we can get a good idea of where the organization might take PS Plus in the short term, obviously, but also long term. So like for the trials, as an example, if they're finding that most people, if they do end up finishing a trial, then they're likely to end up buying the entire game, then that might encourage them to, avoid, well, not necessarily avoid, but, if they don't have to offer a 5-hour trial for a really long game like Baldur's Gate 3, as an example, then maybe they'll be more inclined to just do a 2-hour trial if they know, somebody gets closer to finishing the trial and they want to keep playing more. Like that could be something where they might end up doing that, right? I mean, data is king in scenarios like this for most big organizations. So that's what's so fascinating about looking at a lot of this stuff, right? Especially for the classics game portion, we can see that the top 10, you've only got one PS3 streaming title, and that's off the back of what is a very strong franchise with that halo effect of Ragnarok. So that's not really all too surprising. If anything, I actually am surprised to see that there's 3 emulation titles up there. And the other spots would be filled in from more standard remaster games that are played from the remaster section on PlayStation Plus, and those were third-party titles as well. But it just I guess it kind of is a bit encouraging that Sony can collect some data and show that, hey, these games perform well on premium, but they're also looking at engagement in terms of the subscription itself and not necessarily a la carte data of how many games they sell for those titles as well, because many of them are offered via, you can buy them separately. The point being, I want Sony to be able to have some leverage when they approach other publishers and say, will you join our classics program, please? We only have Disney and we're running out of Buzz Lightyear games. It's like, that's what I want to see more of, but we all know the frustrations going on there. It's interesting to see all this stuff and how they're going to approach PlayStation Plus. Now, something else that we found out about, which was really fascinating, is monthly active users. Now, we normally get this number from Sony's financial reports, but that's always a total number, and they always float around 105 million to 108 million, and that's going to account for every console, off console, the PS mobile app. We don't know exactly how they track the data, but presumably it's just a basic PSN login. We don't normally have a breakdown, but now we do, because we have an internal slide showing the MAUs that run from January 21 all the way to February 2023. And we can see that PS5's active PSN accounts at the time was 37.1 million, the most recent number that we have, which is extremely high given at the time they were at about 40 million consoles sold back then. PS4, unsurprisingly, had the most at 71.5 million, which has been steadily decreasing as more PS5s get sold, and the real news here is PS3's monthly active users as of February 2023 was at 1.9 million users. Now, The other thing is that if you look at the earliest point in the chart, January 2021, PS3 was at 6 million. So it's been decreasing a fair amount to where it's now down to I mean, it's still a lot, obviously, but that is a pretty steep decline from what was only 2 years ago. And there's also a very real chance that they may be including game streaming, if that is how they, try to obfuscate the numbers a little bit. If it's based on somebody that logs into PSN from a remote PS3 and plays a PS3 game, that might count towards PS3 numbers. Probably not. I don't think that would really skew the numbers too much, but either way, it's still something where we got a very recent PS3 number for what is, that's so late into the console's life cycle, which it's really outside of its life cycle, right? It's considered legacy at this point, but I just find that, because obviously we, on this channel, annually check out PlayStation 3's online community. We check out the games that are still somehow running and operating, just barely, but between that and also keeping up with preservation efforts from servers getting reverse engineered and then restored by community efforts, it's always something that we check in on. So we know there's still a lot of people playing PlayStation 3, where a lot of games you can reliably get into a match. And there's just people that tend to log in and play single-player games, earn trophies. There is that free online play. The store does still work. It's operational. It's a real pain to add funds to your account and, finish out a transaction, but it does still work. And so it's... in a way, it's like beautiful to see that there is a viable reason why PlayStation 3 is still going and why the store should still be operating. It actually is kind of surprising that, if you look back at last year where they wanted to close Vita and PlayStation 3, that would have been even more in terms of how many users there are, right? So it's good to know that for now, and definitely there's still a large amount of people engaging with and playing PlayStation 3. The PS3 supremacy is still alive and well. Now, one other news item in relation to the breach, which has been a point of contention, is Insomniac's multiplayer plans, which, we've been following that for a long time now, is that we know they're working on some kind of multiplayer game, whether it's standalone or being tacked on to something else. I mean, we've always been speculating up until this point, and a long time ago we always knew, because, the thing is, Insomniac was never hiding it. It was always very public job listings, so they were always completely okay with putting it out there that they were doing something with multiplayer. And the only thing we could really latch onto is that one job listing a while ago had a line in there for the requirement being that whoever joins that team has to abide by existing IP lore and continuity and things like that. So, it all very much sounded like, okay, that is probably... we assume it's a Marvel property, but it just at least told us at the very minimum it's something that is not their IP. But the running theory for a long time was that it was probably some kind of multiplayer Spider-Man game. And so as a part of the breach, but even outside of the breach, we had Jason Schreier of Bloomberg, where he put out a report about the breach over the weekend, and he spoke with those familiar with Insomniac's plans. And so mentioning the multiplayer standalone Spider-Man game, apparently that game was canceled a long time ago. So between the report and what we did find out about from the breach, we do know that was something that happened at some point, but this is where the point of contention comes in, because it seems like they are still very much, hiring and working on multiplayer to some degree. It just seems like it might show up in something else down the road, and that's kind of where we'll leave that, right? Because again, I get that many are curious about looking at the breach and, trying to figure out what we're going to get next, but it seems very much like that was one thing we're not getting, but it just means that they're looking at other avenues for how they want to explore doing multiplayer at some point, which Insomniac is no stranger to, right? And as far as as far as canceled games go, we can also say that there were, we did find out that at some point or another they were looking at Sunset Overdrive 2, and that was canceled. Same for Resistance 4, that was canceled. So, and that's like disappointing for some that want sequels to those games, but you have to look at the context of both of them. They probably didn't get very far off the ground anyway. Resistance, we know that every new entry, they were selling less and less of that that game, which is disappointing, obviously. And then for Sunset Overdrive 2, that was still tied up a little bit with Microsoft publishing rights, even though the IP belonged to Insomniac, and therefore it's now under SIE, but that's why we're likely to never see the Sunset Overdrive IP come back in any sort of meaningful way, at least not anytime soon. But as far as multiplayer goes, we do know that they were planning on doing some kind of standalone Spider-Man game, but I think we're still probably going to see something at some point down the road, and it does seem like it's inevitable that we'll see this be officially revealed when Insomniac is ready. Let's move on to some God of War news. Christopher Judge, the actor for Kratos, was recently speaking on the Streamily YouTube channel, where he was part of a live stream, having a long-form conversation, and he had started talking about how when it came to doing the voice for Kratos, he had made a remark about how he didn't want to try and replicate T.C. Carson's voice for the original Kratos in the during the Greek mythology, and he was referencing how if say Santa Monica had asked him to try and replicate the voice, he would not want to do it out of respect for T.C. Carson, and he said they did not even want him to do that anyway. He was encouraged to make the character his own, and he had mentioned that he had gotten an opportunity to do something and they wanted him to replicate the voice, and he said, no, I don't want to do it, which some, I guess, were misconstruing as Santa Monica was asking him to do it, and this is kind of in relation to a certain sequence that happens in Valhalla. We're not going to talk about it or spoil anything, but some thought maybe he was referring to that. And then very recently, Christopher Judge did give us an update on this over on X, where he says, and I quote here, "Just to clarify, no one at Sony Santa Monica asked me to voice match TC. The respect for what he did as Kratos goes from top to bottom. It was another game that asked me to do a voice match." And he also said, "Not War for Wakanda." So I guess if you heard about the story, that's what's going on there. But still a class act thing to say, and that's to have that kind of stance from Christopher Judge, especially given that it was still very upsetting how T.C. Carson was kind of left out of the entire process, right? It's not even so much that, they replaced him. I mean, these things do happen, right? It's a reality of any of these businesses, but to not even be called and told, hey, we are going to be casting this new character and there's a new game coming, as a sort of courtesy call, which I know that does happen oftentimes in that kind of business. So it's disappointing, obviously, but still, I love how Christopher Judge did take that stance and put it out there, right, to put respect on TC's name. So that was really heartwarming to see. Now, the other God of War news that we have is about a rumor that popped up over the weekend where the Xbox Era co-founder, Nick Baker, Special Nick, was talking about how he had heard that we're getting some kind of God of War collection remaster or something like that. I don't want to completely put words in his mouth, but to sort of paraphrase the whole thing, because he mentioned it briefly, is that he's not sure exactly if it's a remaster or if it's a full-blown remake, but that we could be seeing the first 3 God of War games come back in some way on current gen platforms, and that is something where God of War 3 Remastered is already playable on PlayStation 5 via backwards compatibility. That game got a proper port on PlayStation 4, so at least as far as 1 and 2 is concerned, he's not exactly sure. But a few places did pick this up, publish the story. I know it was put up on Reddit, and that got 500 something comments. So nowadays with LTPS, we've been steering away from I guess rumors in general, unless there's a solid amount of evidence backing it, or if it's a solid source. And so I know people tend to think that Nick is a bit dubious here, but it is something where off the back of all the data that we had gotten recently, if we want to humor the idea of getting some kind of port for the earlier God of War games, it wouldn't exactly be the most surprising thing. We know that these games are beloved, that they're they're played by a lot of people, as we just discussed from the PS Plus slides, although that was a proper halo effect from from the release of Ragnarok, so that was likely going to happen one way or the other. But between that and also the sales data that we just went over from last week's episode, we know that there are so many franchises throughout PlayStation history, which, and it pains me to say, right? I mean, it happens so often with everybody, wanting their favorite game to come back, whether it's Resistance or, like something that's maybe lesser known or more obscure in the PlayStation lineup, whether it's Medieval, Parappa the Rapper, any kind of Japan studio title. PlayStation has so much IP. We could rattle off a laundry list here, but that's kind of what that sales chart was looking like when you go through all those games, and there's a lot of well performers. But I mean, really the top performers in PlayStation history, it's all primarily the PlayStation 4 generation and up. PS3, which a lot of people tend to look back on, myself included, for a lot of those, IP that are beloved, they just did not perform nearly as well as people think they did. And so that kind of gives us the answer of why we don't see a lot of these games come back. Now, God of War was a top performer, so we're kind of going a bit off the rails here, but it's something where Sony Interactive Entertainment is a business, and we always have to keep that in mind as to why they don't revisit nearly as many games as we think they should. And it's also like just this sort of double-edged sword of like, oh, they're remastering too many games, but also why are they not bringing back all this other stuff that I want? So we know they make these decisions based on what is going to give them the biggest ROI, right? So having said that, I think God of War, if it came back, that would not be the worst thing in the world, given that that's probably going to be a lucrative option for them. Moving on to a new patent filed by Sony Interactive Entertainment. This one was published about 2 weeks ago, and the patent family shows another one which was, again, within this year. So these two patents are very close to each other, both being filed and published this year. So something where, well, going back to the patent we talked about before, this could be what is a key principle going into, say, PlayStation 6. In the case of this patent, to actually talk about what this one is about, the title of it is, it's called Systems and Methods for Enabling Predictive Assistance During Gameplay. So what this would do is that it would use an AI model that tracks the player profile, so it would be on a per player basis. So if you're somebody that doesn't need this, then likely it would never jump in to help you. And you could also probably turn it off. But basically it's able to understand the context of the game and the situation that you're in. Let's say you're about to finish a puzzle, but you're running out of time, or you got to shoot an enemy, but he's about to kill you or something. And so it would predictively understand what button you need to hit in time to sort of accomplish whatever you need to do in that moment, and it would come in and do it for you. So it's all based on an AI model and understanding user profile, and it being very situational as well. But Sony is in the interest of trying to get the barrier of entry as low as possible for people jumping into their platform, playing their games, staying engaged with their content for hours at a time, right? That's what they're looking to do. And so it just seems like this could very much be a key principle going into PlayStation 6. I would not be surprised at all if this is something that they're looking to really make sure this ships as a consumer feature at some point down the road. And it actually, it does sound like a really strong learning mechanism, right? If you're able to start playing a game and, because you see this with a lot of people that maybe have very little experience playing games, especially with controllers, where it's like so tough to manage the camera with the stick and trying to line up to shoot somebody or whatever, right? And so having the game just sort of like give you those training wheels, I feel could actually be really helpful, especially because it could be adaptive over time, and the reliance of that system goes away once you get used to playing the game more. So it's actually a really cool thing to see that they're looking into this stuff in what I would expect is a meaningful way. And we may very well be seeing a lot of patents being filed for technology that is going to be a pillar of PlayStation 6 and beyond. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. You can follow the link down below, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all. We had no Tuesday video, so over the holiday weekend, taking some time off, and we should be back on track this coming Tuesday, where we are probably going to be doing very soon our 2024 PlayStation predictions, our annual predictions video. So that will likely be next Tuesday. If not something else, it would be the following Tuesday. But that's what's going on as far as the channel uploads go. But that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ron Panecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.